Welcome to AEC Unscripted M&A Edition, your go-to podcast for unfiltered conversations and expert analysis. Brought to you by Stambaugh Ness.
Welcome to AEC Unscripted. I'm your host, Jeff Adams, the Director of Mergers and Acquisitions at Stambaugh Ness. Today, we're going to be exploring M&A through the lens of someone who recently led the sale of her firm. I'm delighted to have joining me for this episode, Tracy Scott, the Administrative Director for McAdams. Prior to her firm being acquired by McAdams in November of 2024, Tracy was the CFO of AVID Group. In that capacity, she has overseen all financial aspects of her firm and was the lead principal in negotiating and closing the sale of AVID to McAdams. Now, as the administrative director for McAdams' Florida offices, Tracy plays a pivotal role in supporting operational leadership while ensuring seamless integration with the corporate services team. Tracy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Good morning. Good morning, Jeff.
Well, Tracy, before we jump into things, I just want to give everyone a chance to get to know you a bit. So why don't you just share a little bit about your background, your education, work experience, because it's a little bit different from most people that lead architecture and engineering firms.
That's true. That's true. So I was born in the Midwest. I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. My family moved down here when I was young and went to school then in Florida. Graduated from Florida State University with my bachelor's degree in business, and I minored in marketing. And so my first job out of college was working for a retailer called Burdines. And Burdines is now been acquired by Macy's organization. Mm-hmm. And retail is a really good first job out of college because you get thrown to the wolves, if you will, and you get to learn a lot about business, a lot about sales, a lot about how to manage a department, staffing numbers, FTEs, profitability, cross-selling. So it's a really good job out of college because you get to learn a lot and do it all in hands-on type environment.
And not to mention how to satisfy very challenging and sometimes difficult clients.
Yeah. So. Yes, of course. And the client is always right.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. And so I worked into the banking centers for a couple of years and then transitioned in marketing for about 5 years. And this was through the organization that hired me called Barnett Bank, which was later acquired by Bank of America. Mm-hmm. I did that for about 5 years and then had a wonderful opportunity to open a new division for Bank of America, and it was called in-store banking. And in-store banking was actually putting banks in grocery stores. The delivery channel was different because this was a very cashless environment. There was no cash. We were teaching people how to do deposits through ATM. Mm-hmm. And that may not be a surprise today, but 25 years ago it was very cutting edge. And that delivery channel was different. And so we hired salespeople again to basically sell in the aisles of these grocery stores. So that was very fun. Opening a new division for a company can have a lot of challenges, but it's also very, very rewarding. So, yeah, that's pretty much my background.
So, Tracy, a wide range of skills that you developed there, things that, we'd say are transferable skills. But one thing I have not heard, two words I have not heard come out of your mouth is the word architecture or the word engineering. So how did you end up in the AE industry?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting story. So my brother, Steven Stebbs, he was the founder of AVID Group. He founded AVID Group in 1991 with his then partner. And of course, they ran their business for about 12 years before I entered the picture. And Steve was in the process of buying out his partner at the time. I was at the time working in Jacksonville in my region and got a phone call driving down the highway. Hey, Steve, what's happening? And he said, hey, I'd like you to come to work for me. Of course, I've had my banking background and I was like, well, what am I what would I be doing for you? And so essentially, I think that through the conversations of talking to him, when he was buying out his partner and he really wanted somebody to run the business side of the company of engineering. And with my background, somewhat in banking and business and sales and leadership, I think he wanted to bring somebody on that he could trust to run the accounting, finance, business side of the organization. So through some discussions and considerations and thinking about it, I made the right move and moved back to Tampa Bay and came aboard AVID in 2002. So I've been here about 23 years now.
And I'm sure that was a blessing to your brother to be able to have you come on board, because I know from having worked in the industry myself, but also as a CFO, having met a lot of different firm owners out there, that's one of the biggest challenges for them is finding a finance person they can trust. You're giving them control of a lot of things. And while there are checks and balances that get put in place in an organization, at the end of the day, you're having to place a lot of faith in one person for that CFO role. I know it was great to be able to have a family member that had the background necessary to come in and do that work.
And Steve was very open-minded about all the crazy things that I wanted to do in setting up our corporate services through the years with the ebbs and flow of the business. When I started in 2002, we had about 30 to 35 employees. And through those years, probably up until the recession, we grew to as many as 150 employees. Mm-hmm. And so my background with hiring, business, and things like that, I really think that you don't realize it at the time, but those prior jobs really prepared me to do what I was able to do to help AVID grow in their business. So it was a very rewarding process.
Well, Tracy, you got a story to tell here and share. A major life interruption took place in 2020. And would you mind just sharing that with us a little bit? What happened back then?
Sure. So as I talked about, we had the ebbs and flow of the business, but as many as 150 people back until the recession happened. And we persevered through that, right? We were able to come through, and I feel like our business was getting back on track. Then, boom, this pandemic hit, and nobody was prepared for anything that would be as such. And none of us were even knowledgeable. How do you manage through a pandemic? What is this pandemic? What are all the rules and regulations and things that we needed to prepare for? But just like through the recession, we persevered through, we aligned our business, we followed all the rules, we quarantined as we needed to, we did all of those things. But one day in early 2021, Steve comes to my office and says, I'm not feeling real well. Just like I had, anybody else, I was like, well, you really need to follow the process and go home and test yourself and quarantine until you feel better, and then you can come back to the office. And so he did all of those things. And just, it's very surreal to talk about. But essentially what happened was he went home. He didn't feel well, went to the hospital a couple of days in, and he never made it through the COVID. He had COVID, and it just was one of the tragic events that happened. But after, within a week, he had passed. And so it was just, it's hard to imagine. It's hard to go through, and what a tragedy it was personally and professionally.
And Tracy, I appreciate you sharing that. I know that's a difficult story to share, and I'm sure there's a lot of listeners here that can relate in some way, shape, form, or fashion. A lot of lives were impacted by that 2020, 2021 timeline that we went through there. And so here you are, 2021, suddenly you've been there at the firm for what, 12 years? Is that right at that time?
Let's see. I'd probably been there maybe closer to 18 years at that point.
18 years. Okay. Yeah. My math's bad. But yes, you've been there 18 years, but wearing the finance hat most of the time through it all, but working alongside them. So now here you are, suddenly thrusted into being responsible for your brother's baby. What did you do?
So I got the call on a Monday, and of course, I had been somewhat prepared because we were able to go see Steve prior to his passing, and they let us go in there. So I was expecting that it was probably going to happen. And so I did get the call. It was a Monday morning. I can remember it very vividly. It's just something you don't forget, but got the call. And, I immediately was going to be concerned about the fact that I did not want any of our employees and any of our clients to hear through a grapevine or rumor mill or what have you. So I had called a key manager here at AVID, and I said, I really need to talk with the three other key people here that are leaders of the firm. And no questions asked. Absolutely. Where do you want to meet? What time? They didn't ask any questions, but we did. We met at 9 o'clock at a local restaurant, little IHOP next door to us. And I shared them news that Steve had passed. And, our game plan at that point was first, obviously, they didn't even have a chance to digest what had just happened. And some of these individuals had worked with Steve for over 18 years. One of our key leaders went to college with him. So these wounds were deep, right? And they really didn't even get a chance to digest it. It was really, what do we need to do right now to pick up ourselves and to pick up AVID and move us forward? And so that's what we did. We discussed our game plan, which was first, we need to make sure that every client is phoned. And we divided that up and they took those calls. And I said, I'll handle doing the employee meeting so that everybody can hear what's happened, because people are skeptical, right? Steve's not come back to the office. What's happening? It's very fearful time in the world. And so we weren't even allowed to have our meeting in our office. We brought everybody downstairs in our parking garage area. And I told them what had happened, that Steve had passed, and was really more of communication, but reassurance that they didn't need anything to worry about, that AVID would continue, and that they could put their trust in myself and the other key leaders of AVID. And so that's essentially what we did for the next 3 years. Together, the four of us ran AVID Group, day-to-day operations, continued with our projects, continued with all of our meetings. We were very intentional about communicating with our employees frequently and sharing our financials, so they knew that we were still a very profitable organization, that they could still work here, that there's nothing for them to worry about. But we also, as the leadership group, knew we had somewhat of a long road ahead of us, because we were going to need to obviously go through an estate process to regain any of the shares back, since Steve was our majority shareholder and president. So that's what we did for the next 3.5 years. And it took about that long for us to finally settle the estate and then regain the ownership back for our shares in AVID. So I was able to successfully get 100% ownership of AVID.
Yeah. What kind of turnover did you have after that event? So you communicated to everybody, say, trust us. How was turnover? Did everything stay intact, or did some people stay top down?
Sure. By and large, we had very little turnover, but we did have some people leave. But I don't know if it would have been part of our process of turnover and just the ebbs and flow of the business. I don't know that anybody really directly left because of what happened, but I'm sure that people were still afraid at some point. Nobody really came to me and said that. I always reassured them of our ability to continue to lead AVID, that we had a lot of work, that we were profitable, that we were able to show them that in our financials, that day to day our operations were still the same. We were still wanting to hire staff. We were still in the need for more, good quality technical staff. So we continued to look, recruit, and interview. It was just truly that we were missing our president, our leader. So, yeah.
And it sounds like a new leader emerged, though, Tracy. I'm sitting here thinking about how all those skills that you were getting back there in your banking days and pre-AE industry days, how much they just prepared you for that moment. And having been a CFO in the industry myself, I can sit here and put myself a little bit in your shoes, and think, oh my gosh, what do I do? Hats off to you for doing such a wonderful job transitioning the firm through that interruption. that happen in the business. Any advice coming out of that you have for firm owners today, based on your experience going through that? What advice would you have for firm owners?
Well, the length of time it took for us, right, through the estate process was really attributed to the fact that we weren't quite ready to have a transition. So while we had an operating agreement, there was a lot of documents that were vague. Steve, being the majority shareholder, was going to be, taxing on the company to buy him out. So there wasn't a clear and distinct succession planning process. And I think that for business owners, their intentions of what they want to do with their life's work is important for the people remaining to know. What would Steve want to do? What do I want to do when I am finally done and hang my hat after my life's work in the business? Because we didn't have a lot of that knowledge, even with Steve being my brother, we just didn't talk about that. Some of those things are not talked about as frequently as I think we need to do as business owners.
Yeah, I think it's very common, right? I mean, we don't like talking about things like that.
Right.
But I think your story, people hearing that, hopefully their takeaway is, maybe I should have some of those difficult conversations that's part of maintaining the legacy, right? Not everybody's going to have someone like yourself that's sitting there that could come in and help fulfill that legacy and carry it on to successful story like you did. So let's kind of shift on that a little bit, Tracy. And your whole ownership, we mentioned you guys sold to McAdams in November of this past year, but how about sharing with us, how did the ownership transition plans come about?
So, as I mentioned, it was about 3.5 years in. And I think that we worked really hard maintaining the company nose to the ground. We really didn't change a lot. We were very blessed that clients continued to want to work with us, continued to bring us projects. We had those relationships established. But when we got through the transition, after we were able to regain the full ownership of Stephen's stock, I think we were kind of left with, what was our identity? This was Steve's company. It was his identity. We did things exactly as he was doing them. But I think at the end, we kind of looked back when we were ready to transition and said, we really do have some things we need to work on, right? We have some archaic processes. We have very little bench team in terms of succession planning amongst ourselves. We had some staff that were going to be retiring, very key staff that were going to be retiring, and that was going to leave us some voids there. And just systems and equipment in general, we had neglected a lot of it because we would just focus on continuing the business post COVID and the tragedy with Steve's passing. And so when we were looking at, possibly putting our own succession planning in place, I think it was the realization that maybe we weren't ready to do it ourselves. And so timing is always everything. And so just about the time I got the letter from John McAdams. And I had received some emails through those 3 years that I led the company from other firms and some private equity groups, and just wasn't anything that we were ready to entertain at the time. And so when I got the letter from John, his letter was very personal. It wasn't an email. He knew me. I felt like he knew me. I felt like he was talking right to me. I felt like
Wow.
he was interested, and it was very, very personal. And that was very touching to me, and it intrigued me somewhat. And so John said in his letter that he was going to call me. And he did. He called me, like, maybe it was about 2 days after I probably had opened that letter. I was very honest with him, and he was very genuine. I said, "Sir, I really don't know if we're ready for this or not." He didn't push. He just said, "Well, if you're interested in a conversation, we would be open to just having an initial Teams call."
Mm-hmm.
And so for some reason, I did. I agreed to it. And so John, Mike Munn, and myself, we had an initial call, talked a little bit about our companies. They talked to me about McAdams. I, of course, talked to them about everything that happened in detail with AVID. and who we are and our service lines. And we just had a very nice, genuine conversation. It didn't feel like pressure, it didn't feel like overselling. It just felt like three people talking about our businesses. I think we had even talked about having a next meeting.
Mhm.
And so in the back of my mind, though, I really felt so torn because I really wanted the team that had helped me lead Avid through this transition. I wanted them to be on board with it. I didn't want it to be a secret. I didn't want to be going behind their backs. I really felt like it was something I wanted to pick their brain. Would they be interested? And so I had lunch with one of the key leaders and I kind of threw it out there. I said, do you think you would be interested talking just to a couple companies that might be interested in us? And there was an openness. There was a genuine openness to, yeah, sure, let's have a discussion. It can't hurt. And so I think that agreement and buy-in and the support that I felt like I received from the key leaders, I felt like allowed us to open that door to further conversations down the stream here with McAdams. And that was really important to me because they put their faith in me and I relied on them through that whole process as, we were through those 3.5 years. And that's what we did. We had a couple meetings. We took a trip to Raleigh, North Carolina, where their corporate office is, and they showed us around for a couple of days. They presented, if you will, their corporate services team and the types of services and support that they would be able to provide Avid that we didn't have today, support in onboarding and recruiting and how they align their service teams and sharing of projects and philanthropic type also
Mhm.
things that they believe in. And I just think their values and their vision and wanting to be in Florida, all of those things just really aligned for us and really got our buy-in. And so that is kind of what led us to those next conversations, which was leading to the LOI.
Yeah. So tell about how that process went. Now you've gone in, you've seen McAdams' office, you got to experience their culture a little bit, see what they're about, realize they're the right fit. How did your process going through the LOI work and the due diligence that followed thereafter?
This was all very new to me. I have obviously never been in a process of any kind of due diligence like this or the LOI. And so the LOI, I is really the roadmap, right? It's what you agreed upon. And things that were important to me, I just wanted to throw out there is I had one thing that I felt like I had done a fairly decent job of going into that was I knew the value of Avid. I had already gotten 2 valuations and I felt really confident about the value of Avid and
Mhm.
those things. And then secondarily, what was important to me was that my team would be taken care of, that they would be able to have some type of leadership role or perhaps stock opportunities within McAdams. And all of those things were very, I just think they rolled very well. There wasn't any objection to that. They didn't object to any of our valuations. I think they looked at them. They were very fair. They offered those same opportunities to my staff. And so with that, I thought, it flowed very well. We didn't have to do, deep dive negotiations back and forth. It was very agreeable on both sides. And the one thing for me that was the best thing was that I had only really had one request. And that request was that they would allow our Avid name to be present for 18 to 24 months as we transition.
Mhm.
And there was no objection there. And I felt like that was the one thing that was so important to me. And there was absolutely no objection. And so I knew in my heart it was the right opportunity.
So you had the LOI signed, and most times buyers, take 90, maybe some 120 days to do the due diligence work. I believe in your case, it took a little longer. We had some vacations we were trying to manage around. If I recall, you were out of the country for a period of time and some things going on that McAdams was willing to work around and all. But tell us a little bit about that due diligence experience. I mean, you being the CFO, you're carrying the brunt of it. You're wearing both hats in this case. Share with people. I tell them all the time, this is a big deal. I say the further we get down, the more of your time it's going to take.
Yes.
What was that experience like?
Yes. it's very time consuming. So I had obviously not had any experience going through any type of due diligence like this. But again, hats off to my consultants and advisors that helped me. So essentially what happens is it's a back and forth process. It's an open book where you're sharing essentially everything from the financial side all the way down to the system side, everything about your company. And it's sort of in question process, do you have this? Please upload this, share with me this, your articles of organization, your corporate processes, any other shareholders. I mean, it goes everything from the very beginning all the way to current to your immediate financials from the previous year. And you're uploading these documents and you're having calls. I think we had a weekly call probably for the first, entire week till we closed for 5 months. And it's intimidating is what it is, because I was blessed to have the experiences of leading the business side of AVID. So I was able to provide the information. But when people are questioning you and you're not sure of the answer, or you feel like you need to look for that document and you're going to have to rep and warrant something, you want to be sure things are accurate to the best of your knowledge and belief. And so it can be a little painful, but I think you're doing it to persevere through to the very end because it's the right thing for your company.
Yeah, and I think it's a time where a seller might hit the pause button and say, wait a minute, am I doing the right thing here? Right? Because you start thinking, is this something unique about this buyer? It's
Right.
not.
Yes.
Every buyer has to do this. It's just part of the process. I mean, you're selling your business to them. They're buying your business. Everything about your business, they're buying.
Yeah.
And I know some of that due diligence items, I tell founders all the time that some questions you're going to get asked are going to be things you haven't even thought about since you started the firm.
Exactly.
For you, the way you came into it after it was founded, you may not have even thought about some of those questions until you're being asked in due diligence. So,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, corporate records of things that happened before I came there, when they initially founded the company, I had to put my fingers on those items. And for me, because I had become the sole owner of Avid, it was me on the screen, and then there was multiple people from the McAdams side on the screen. I felt like it was like they were shooting me questions back and forth. We were shooting.
yeah.
And so Mike Munn was so gracious. I mean, he would say, I'm sorry. I think he indeed truly felt that, he didn't want to obviously intimidate me in the process, but the process is real. I mean, that's how it really works. And they were very sensitive to my feelings about that and being the sole recipient of all the questions through the process. But we made it through. I think for the most part, I provided all the data I could to the best of my knowledge and belief, and it satisfied their questions and things that they needed to know about Avid as we were getting into this process together. So the LOI rolls into the due diligence piece. And I give a lot of credit to Mike Munn because he recommended that I have my own counsel and my own advisors. And so, of course, Stambaugh Ness was my advisor. And so I did that. And I was very grateful for that advice because I don't know that I would have known that. I mean, I think on the business side, I probably would have thought about it, but the fact that he brought it up, I think, was great for me being able to seek that out and have the confidence to have my own attorneys and advisors in the process.
Yep. And it was our pleasure to work alongside you through that and help guide you through that process and getting to know you through all this. It's been a few months now since the acquisition. What's been your experience thus far transitioning the firm? I think in particular, one point I'd like you to hit on, you'd inherited your brother's baby, as I like to say. You're taking care of him, and here 3.5 years later, you're now having to let go of that and give control to somebody else. Talk about that a little bit, because every founding owner has that, but I'm sure you felt that as well where you were. So,
yeah, it's harder than you think it is. I think you prepare yourself And I knew it was the right thing. So it wasn't a question of any type of regret or anything like that. But you are handing over your control, if you will, to the bigger goal, which is to continue to grow our Florida operations and become a part of McAdams and help them grow as well. But it is hard. Your roles change. You're not the top decision maker anymore. You're learning to navigate through, even though your cultures may be similar, but they're still going to be different. You're learning the key players of a new organization. It's like starting over again. The one thing that we really liked, which was the other thing I liked about joining McAdams, was we were also going to be helping them grow a Florida operation that they've never been in. So I think for us, even though we're learning how to navigate through the new culture of McAdams, I'm helping to bring that into my organization here in Florida. And we're teaching them a little bit about how Florida works. And we're going to be able to put ourselves on the map in being in Florida as part of the McAdams organization. And I really like that. But it is a challenge to start over, to have that mindset of, oh, I have a new boss now. You used to be at the top. Now I'm somewhere down the food chain. But as business owners, it can be difficult because we're entrepreneurs, right? We started our businesses because we wanted to build something and we wanted to be able to control certain aspects of that. And so now we're relinquishing some of those responsibilities or those things that we believed in ourselves.
So now that you're, well, let's say, 5 months, 6 months in, well, what does integration look like? What's taken place thus far? What's yet to take place?
Good stuff has happened, actually. Well, systems integration pretty much tries to begin immediately, right? You're going to merge in your people, your processes, your benefits start, your payroll starts to transition. You start integrating into your new accounting software programs, your billing to your clients. All of those things start in those first couple of months. And for us, we've been so fortunate. We just moved our office. And so we were in a small suburb called Palm Harbor, and now we're located in Tampa. We have a beautiful 17,000 square foot office that we work in. And it's just great to be located a little bit more central into Tampa. That gives us a little bit more visibility here as we continue to grow our McAdams operation. So that's been our transition that we've been focusing on. Just hired a new business development officer. So that'll give us some more exposure on the streets as we navigate out of the AVID, who is AVID now, who is McAdams. So helping our clients and the industry learn more about McAdams in Florida.
Well, I think it sounds like it's been a pretty smooth experience. There's no perfect one. I mean, it's just like a marriage or any other kind of human relationships, when it involves more than one,
Yeah.
there's always going to be challenges to have to deal with. But it sounds like you did all the right things of going in, and McAdams did a lot of the right things, the way they approached you to begin with. I love that story of how John approached you originally with a personal letter, followed it up with a call, didn't push you, just, hey, Tracy, we'll go at the speed you want to go when you want to go. And just
Everything about what we
Yeah.
learned from John McAdams in the very first letter is exactly the way our interactions have been with everybody at McAdams. That the genuine feel that we felt is truly how we still feel today. They're very people-oriented organization. They're very want to be involved in helping us with every part of our business. And I have to say, Jeff, that's really hard because when you're a small organization like AVID was for those years, I mean, you just did everything. You took out the trash and you marketed projects and so now we have so many wonderful resources helping us. Sometimes we forget, oh yes, we have a recruitment department that can help with this, or we have expertise in Raleigh for water resources or services that we don't even offer here or we didn't offer at AVID. So it's wonderful to have those resources. We're not used to it. We're not used to having that. And so sometimes I have to stop myself and say, oh yeah, we've got people for that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Tracy, just thinking through a lot of tidbits you've thrown out there that I think both buyers and sellers have picked up on as they've listened to you talk about this, but anything specifically, any specific advice that you'd like to give to either buyers or sellers that you've learned from your M&A experience?
I mean, from my experience, I feel things that were important for me in the process that helped the transition was, number one, I had the buy-in from my senior leaders of wanting to be involved in the process. I got their buy-in. I felt that the fact that I had some evaluations done, I wasn't in the dark about where we needed to be financially. Those were very, very important to me in the process as I went through it. And then just for all business owners, having a strong succession plan in place, what are your intentions? What do you want to do with your business when you're ready to either retire or just you're at a point where you're ready to want to be bigger or different than what you are today? Is be prepared for that somehow, either by verbalizing that or preparing with the succession planning internally based on your operating agreements.
Well, Tracy, I appreciate you so much for joining us for today's episode. It's just been great hearing your story, and you're always just fun to talk with. But I appreciate you also just getting vulnerable and really sharing the challenges you went through with your brother's passing. And my heart goes out to you and your family going through that, and I'm sure many of the others feel the same here. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, for having me today.
Thank you for tuning in to AEC Unscripted M&A Edition. I'm Jeff Adams, and it's been a pleasure guiding you through M&A from the unique perspective of a seller who successfully managed the huge responsibility of transitioning the legacy of her firm. Please remember to subscribe and leave us a review wherever you get your podcast. Until next time, keep pushing forward.